Bonjour à tous, bon après-midi. It's a real honor for me to be here on behalf of Garda World, who is a major partner to this great conference. I must remind that Garda World is one of the top 5th largest private security provider in the world, with 62,000 employees spread over more than 30 countries. And Garda World was born here in Montreal about 20 years ago, and it has also his headquarters in Montreal. So that being said, it's a privilege for me to introduce you to this special session in which will be addressed the need to transition toward clean energy if we really want to ensure a sustainable development for the future. So let me now introduce you to our two distinguished speakers. Mr. Oleg Deripaska. So Mr. Deripaska was appointed as RUSAL's president in November 2014. He oversees new development strategies for the company, one of the world's largest aluminum producers. Since January 2009, Mr. Deripaska has been Chief Executive Officer of RUSAL. Mr. Deripaska has a very, very impressive track record as an entrepreneur. I could speak here for on and on and on, but he will make it the point himself. In 1997, Mr. Deripaska, then Director General of the Sayanogorsk aluminum smelter, created Russia's first vertically integrated company, Siberian Aluminum, that in 2001 was renamed Basic Element. And later, that company incorporated a number of Russia's leading aluminum production facilities. In 2000, Siberian Aluminum became one of the world's top 10 aluminum producers. Mr. Deripaska is also Vice President of the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, Chairman of the Executive Board of the Russian National Committee, and a member of the Competitiveness and Entrepreneurship Council, which is a Russian government agency. In 2004, President Putin appointed Mr. Deripaska as Russia's representative in the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Business Advisory Council. In 2007, he was appointed chairman on the council's branch in Russia. Honorable Brian Tobin. Mr. Brian Tobin was named as an officer of the Order of Canada for his contribution to Canadian public policy as a federal and provincial politician and for supporting economic development in Newfoundland and Labrador. Mr. Tobin served as the Federal Minister of Industry from 2000 to 2002, prior to which he served as the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador from 1996 to 2000. Before, he served as a Member of Parliament from 1980 to 1996 and as Minister of Fisheries and Oceans in the Federal Cabinet from 1993 to 1996. Mr. Tobin is Vice Chair, Investment and Corporate Banking, BMO Capital Markets. He serves as Chairman and Director of New Flyer Industries, Inc., Lead Director and Vice Chairman of Aecon Group, Inc., and is a Director of Element Financial Corp. Mr. Tobin previously served as Executive Chairman, President, and CEO of Consolidated Thompson Iron Mines Limited, and he led the negotiating team that sold CLM to Cliffs Natural Resources, which was one of the biggest global mining deals in 2011. Ladies and gentlemen, Oleg Deripaska and Brian Tobin.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Christian, for your kind introduction, both Oleg and I. And let me say it's a great pleasure to be here at this conference, which increasingly is becoming one of the preeminent gathering places for the exchange of ideas and the exchange of leaders, thought leaders from all around the world. Oleg, it's a great pleasure to be here with you and to share this platform with you. You are unquestionably, as we've just heard from Christian, one of the most important business and thought leaders in Russia. Your voice has been heard there and heard all around the world on a variety of subjects. You have, and I will come to these questions in a few minutes, but you've been very thoughtful and forceful on your comments on the Paris Accord. You've had much to say about a carbon tax and how it should apply and where it should apply, amongst other subjects. You've been called upon to play a leadership role in Russia and beyond Russia, elsewhere in diplomatic terms, elsewhere in terms of innovation policy, environmental policy, and the list goes on and on. So it's a rare opportunity to have a an accomplished and influential leader with us today. Now, maybe I'll just start by saying, you said to me a moment ago that you've just come from Concordia University, where you visited the engineering program there. So you will have seen just how bright and able and smart and talented and innovative the university is, and folks there are. You're in Canada, which perhaps has the very best access to the United States by way of the North American Free Trade Agreement, and if Brian Mulroney's anywhere within listening distance, he's applauding, saying that about time that guy Tobin woke up and figured out what I did when I was Prime Minister. What kind of lessons might you have drawn from, or observations might you have made from your visit to Concordia, and what might it say about Canada's opportunity to continue to do business with our biggest trading partner, the United States, in the context of clean energy? So, with all of that, over to you. I'm going to sit back now for 10 minutes. Carry on.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak in such audience. And yes, I've seen one of your wonderful facility in Concordia. Great people. Apparently, would be a great student in a proper facility. And one of the reasons why we went there, we've always been curious why Canada, with such resources, actually do not process more. And we try to understand what's actually may help to process more resources on Canadian soils, since you have this excellent access to US market. And we've seen that ever since then. When we ask professors, PhD, what's missing, they said capital missing. There should be more investment, and I think this forum is perfect place to address this subject. As I said, we believe that Canada can do much more in processing, and this opportunity which proper environmental responsibility create in the world for Canadian manufacturing is enormous. We've seen this move towards carbon-free economy is very important, especially in power generation. Of course, it's create a lot of liabilities, and this is something which very unfair when in a country like Canada or a state like California takes this liability upon them. But I think it's important to show the way, and finally it will create more opportunity. What we learn from our perspective when we try to decarbonize all our processes, that yes, you have a lot of costs in the beginning. It's tough, especially if you and your banks, your shareholders, need to produce a proper return for them. But in the end, you can eliminate a lot of waste. Actually, the success of our group that we learn, how to operate. We spent a lot of time to deepen our learning of operation practice. We know how to develop people, and this development helps us to address a lot of issues which we face. When we develop our group and our companies, we choose a strategy that we will commit our efforts, not just financial success, but also social development. We address a lot of issues on science, education, proper cooperation with the NGO, local community. One of our example of cooperation in Guinea, when Ebola spark in this country, we built proper partnership with Guinea government. We managed to bring proper resources, and actually one of the reasons why this outbreak was handled properly is Russia and Guinean government participation in this problem, with the proper resources which was allocated from the both countries and from our group and committed partners of Guinean Republic. But as you mentioned, environment become more important issue than ever, and Paris Agreement, of course, create a framework and a lot of expectation. But without economic model, how you can price, your efforts, or let's say how you can really create the same liabilities or responsibilities all around the globe, and actually it's the only way, putting carbon tax or carbon levy or whatever carbon pricing, should be installed is the only chance for us, to handle this issue. And if someone travel and see equatorial part of the ocean, you may see that almost all coral already dead, and it's devastating. For the last 3 years, what's happened, and we can understand that if at the same scale like China, India will start burning its coal resource, it will be even faster, and consequence would be even harder. That's why we believe that environmental issues should be properly addressed, and sooner we will create, and we see what's Canadian government step was by introducing this carbon tax. I think it's a very proper and good example of how this issue should be done.
Oleg, I want to come back to your comments on a carbon tax and on the Paris Accord, but first I want to stay a little closer to home. It's intriguing when you talk about more can be done in Canada, specifically Quebec, given our access to the U.S. market. You said what is missing, and you mentioned capital. Of course, Quebec has had a policy of using the availability of power to attract industry and sustain good jobs and technology for some time. And can you share with us any more your thoughts about how further industrial development might occur or further job creation might occur by bringing, it sounds to me you're saying, bringing jobs closer, higher tech jobs, higher value jobs closer to where the power is?
It's tough to present this case in detail, but let's, let's try to understand some numbers. You produce 3.3 million tons of primary metal. You process on your soil less than 500,000. You use another 100,000 tons of scraps. And you import in different semi-product, to assembly on Canadian soil another 2 million tons. And what should be available to you, to the Canadian industry, of course, you have great access to US market. You can, instead of, wasting a lot of resources, you can use scrap, which also produced in the same place. And, you have an opportunity to develop up to 10 times more, production, of aluminum product. And as we saw today in your, university, that even 3D printing and any difficult issues which face in this new sector, and very innovative science was developed in-house, and you actually have a qualified people who could address this issue, and it's just one tiny part of our business. But what we've seen, there is a great demand. You have a people who understand what to do, what's missing. I think some, incentive, tax incentive, utility prices, and of course, capital incentive.
I'm going to leave that as more to come as you continue to think about the opportunity, and presumably perhaps the opportunity for you and for your team to participate in filling that gap. Let me come back to the Paris Accord. Has been very topical of recent days and weeks. The U.S. has withdrawn from the Paris Accord. Virtually all other countries have reinforced their commitment to it in response to that development. You have been quoted in the past as saying that the Paris Accord ought not to be ratified unless and until it has enforceable provisions in it. In other words, it has teeth, because you think some major emitters, polluters, will not be persuaded to participate the way they should unless there is some way to enforce their violation of the spirit and the intent of the Accord. Do you still hold that view at this stage of the game?
Yeah, there is a clear example. We have more than a year since Paris was signed, and if you see what's going on in China and India. They just increase, their impact on environment. They pollute more, they build more coal-fired plant. It's understandable. But at the same time, there is no motivation for them to change. Whatever commitment taken in Paris, it was just a broad structural obligation to, how to say, in China case, to keep pollution per unit of GDP, which very broad, and who knows when and how it would happen by 2030. But we can see 177 coal-fired plant which was started after Paris Accord was built, and we have almost same situation with India. And if China burn around 5 billion tons of coal per year, it's a massive amount, out of total 12. And India prepared to burn another 3 billion tons. There's a very significant impact on environment. And one of our colleagues showed us the data the other day that 28% of pollution in California come directly from China, and it's only growing. That's why whatever efforts or measures would be taken, take a car industry, you can press them down for efficiency of and emission standard. But to be honest, if there would be a quarter of, or let's say more than a quarter, 1/3 of pollution come from the source which no one control, even if 100% of vehicles in California would be electric, it will not solve the problem.
So when you talk about teeth or enforcement mechanisms, Oleg, what do you mean? I mean, how do you suggest the accord be made effective? You're talking about financial penalties, trade penalties? I mean, how do you make sure that those who sign on, and in the case of China, those who stand up and say we're now ready to take a global leadership role, which is effectively what China has said, how should effective measures be put in place? What kind of measures?
Should be global tax or global price is the only way, because otherwise it's just another 10 years of negotiations, trying to save faces, because everyone wants to have successful negotiations then. And yeah, you're right. In the end of the day, trade is the only vehicles to promote proper agreements. And maybe it was not so bad if, and we don't know how Trump administration will play its role in these efforts. But maybe it's not so bad to start negotiation now, not wait by 2025 when everyone would be assured that it's nothing happening.
So if I hear you well, these two matters are tied, your views on the Paris Accord and the lack of teeth, and your call for a carbon tax, global carbon tax.
It's the only way.
Let me ask you, thinking about your businesses, and of course there's a wide range of businesses, some obviously bigger than others, but you've got about 200,000 people across a multiplicity of countries and sectors who work for you. How are your businesses being affected by the transition to clean energy? And how are you adapting to that requirement, that reality?
The best example is RUSAL. We start with various power source basket. At this moment we focus only hydro and nuclear, 96% hydro nuclear base, and we committed in 7 years to be 100%. In our manufacturing, we focus more and more on, for example, in commercial vehicle, on gas-powered vehicle, and we create a lot of initiatives in Russia, to make sure that the big city, in commercial vehicles in big city would be natural gas powered, and we think it's a good improvement. And until proper electric battery wouldn't be developed, is the only way to actually be commercially successful, in our businesses. For the rest, we try to eliminate every waste possible in process, waste, in proper way, that we can, reduce our environmental impact. And of course, it's a cost. For some project, this cost and beared by the company, and it's difficult to, how to say, to do more unless there would be, common liabilities that, as I said, the only way. And it will not talk just about air pollution. And maybe for a country like China and India, air is not the main problem. The main problem is water. If you look at this mostly populated area in eastern provinces of China, that the water is so contaminated that proper restoration of these resources may take 30, 40 years. It's different scientists try to understand better how deep is contamination. And this is something which we try to use as a modus operandi in our group. We try to use any resources with the minimum waste we put back on the ground or in the soil.
Let me just, time is precious, but let me come back to another area where you've taken some personal leadership, and that's the climate partnership of Russia. You pulled together through RUSAL, NGOs, the government, other corporate leaders to unilaterally begin the process of dealing with environmental issues. How has that process played out? What kind of progress has been made, and what kind of commitment remains with respect to commitment to a cleaner environment, a more sustainable approach to the environment?
In Russia, it was adopted and implemented. Of course, there is a timeline, quite a tough regulation. For example, for some region like Siberia, where we work, there is a regulation tougher than in Europe. In some area, but it's not just regulation; it's commitment of the company. Yes, we're lucky. We have a lot of gas, hydro resources, nuclear energy, and I think it's our main advantage. But it's important to put it through to make sure that Russia not just automatically fulfill its obligations, since we reduced dramatically industrial output after 1991. But also, we try to make sure that this regulation, brings, better solution, for existing facilities, that we can modernize it, using tax advantages and commitment from the government. And so far, it's a good result. And we believe that our area like Siberia would be a good platform for even for the next century, how conservation could be done, and in a proper address of energy solution. We built our first solar plant in Siberia, and actually we see that further development of solar unit could create more solution for our neighbors in Mongolia and China. And as I said, commitment of the main companies in Russia to environmental issue, I think it's important, and we can see more investment in this process.
Well, our time is up, so I'm going to thank you very much for your insights. And note that ever since 2012, the world has produced more renewable energy every single year than carbon-based energy, a record amount in 2015 and again in 2016. We're going in the right direction. A lot of it comes from leadership, not just at governments. That's okay. That's important, but comes from individuals, and in particular, corporate leaders. So thank you for your contribution in that regard, and thank you for coming to this conference, for sharing with the delegates today.